actually can prosecute militant groups after a conflict. We don't think it's an effective deterrent in order to future recruitment, and the reason for this is that, firstly, as Jack already pointed out, I had no response, the imperative to recruit for these groups is so strong. And the other thing that they weren't willing to respond to was the idea that, at least under our model, a government, say the Sri Lankan government, which does actually kind of care about the international community in a sense, has now got some kind of regulatory framework that can construct to its own benefit in terms of its standing in the international community to do the thing that it had to do and did do anyway, which was recruit child soldiers despite this ban on it. The second reason it's not an effective deterrent is because often the people who we catch who are actually doing the recruiting are just the guys caught up in the conflict because they themselves have no choice within these groups about what they do. So they are actually forced to go and recruit these children because if they don't, the guy above them is going to shoot them or do something bad to them because that's the way the accountability mechanisms in these very harsh groups works. So again, you're not actually getting to be able to punish the guilty party. That's another reason it doesn't work. So, what are the harms of this? Well, the first point to make about it is, again, it just shows us absolutely how useless these international bans are, but we think there's an additional harm in the sense that to the extent that we can in some way prosecute these groups, often what happens is that the prosecution is very biased towards my group. So, for example, it's been found that in the Sri Lankan situation, both the Tamil Tiger rebels and the Sri Lankan government were recruiting soldiers, but it was the Tamil Tigers who got massively penalised, and the Sri Lankan government didn't, because they were the ones who were conducting the kind of jurisdiction over that area and the penalty. And what's the harm of this? Well, it goes back to what Jack was talking about, when he said, what we do is we just make these groups do worse things. They engage in recruitment in a worse way, because what it does is it ostracises them. They feel like the other party is being treated far more fairly than they have, and so they're not going to stop recruiting soldiers. They're just going to get angry and get much harder to deal with. So ladies and gentlemen, where does that bring us in this debate? If you actually care about what happens to these children, you will recognise that the opposition have given us no reason to believe that their ban is in any way effective in reducing recruitment. And secondly, if you care about what happens to these children, you will recognise the opposition have given us no reason to believe that the many, many harms of their ban do not occur and make the situation for children worse. That is why we are most proud to propose.
Final speaker reading the second opposition speaker from Loyola, Bobby Cashley.
Madam Speaker, I've got 3 points of crystallization for this today. I'm going to sum it up in 3 questions. How can developing nations best protect themselves, and can children be good soldiers? Funny. Second, should the international community prohibit the use of child soldiers? And third, what happens to these children after this happens? So, first, how can developing war-torn nations best protect themselves? Well, the opening government would have us believe that we should conscript an army of like toddlers and preteens who know jujitsu and like carry Uzis and stuff, right? We don't think that that's necessarily the solution to the problem. We think they're trying to compete or combat a problem of child soldiers with war child soldiers. We think that that is the problem in countries like, in continents like Africa today, right? Where we see child soldiers being used more and more by rebel groups, and we think that you actually perpetuate this problem. So the problem that opening government gives us is that rebels terrorize communities, and that individuals within these communities cannot protect themselves. But we would say that rebels are derived from competing factions within these communities, which means that even if you train child soldiers to protect themselves, they will inevitably become members of a competing faction within that community, meaning that those child soldiers will inevitably become members of rebel factions. If you want to defeat pirates amongst rebel factions, stop giving them children to turn into soldiers. That's the solution, not giving more factions. We we think that you're merely just giving them more children to kill each other until all of them are gone. Right? Okay. But what's more is that all of the impacts that we get outside government today are derived from rebels using terrible and brutal tactics because they are somehow black market actors, right? But the point is that they will still be in these rebel groups, which means that the impacts still exist. You merely exacerbate them by giving them more and more children. Secondly, we would say that there is a very distinct difference between active and passive self-defense. Emily gave you this example. In a passive example, children would be given the right to be able to shoot back at somebody that was coming at their sister with an AK-47 with that crazy look in their eye. But the second, the active, is what a child soldier actually is, in which these child soldiers actively go out and fight for their communities to prevent something from happening to them in the future. We don't think that self-defense is what child soldiers are used for.